So it'll take, like I said, about 15-20 minutes to talk a little bit about hackathon prep and discussion. This is module 9.E for extra session. Just as a reminder, this first part is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. You can find the materials, student materials folder. And again, the hackathon teaming document is up. We'll talk in a minute about using that. And please do join the Slack if you haven't yet. It is a useful resource throughout the hackathon. I'd like to thank our funding sources through the NSF and the NIH, as well as our support networks through the IUB Biocomplexity Institute, as well as the OpenVT and Glimprint initiatives. So this note here is actually for tomorrow about the hackathon main room meeting being recorded and conditionally distributed on YouTube. We'll talk a little bit about how the schedule works in a slide or two here. But we do want to say up front that anybody who is presenting about material that they do not want shared, live on the internet or in recorded form, you can send us a note and we'll make sure to edit that out before we upload anything from the hackathon presentation sessions. So as far as schedule goes, we're looking at, again, 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday will be largely a grouping and setup day tomorrow. There will be some time for actually working on your project, depending on how early you and your group form and want to get started. But we tend to have a little bit of group member flux on day one as people try to find the project that they're most suited for. So we usually like to try to wait until Saturday to really start kicking off the model building work. So from 10 to 11 tomorrow, we'll have one last opportunity for final lightning talks or talk updates. If you'd like to present anything else about your topic, even if you've already presented, you can use some of that time to either re-present tomorrow or give us an update if you've been maybe starting work on your idea so far, if you found some more resources, things like that. From 11 to 12, we'll have kind of an open teaming session. Project group leaders can talk with people who are potentially interested in their projects, with the idea being that by around noon, you should have kind of an initial idea of who you might be working with for the rest of the weekend. And again, that can change throughout the day if needed, but by noon, we'll kind of get you started on your project setup, scoping, and planning. So spending a little bit of time thinking about what the project looks like, what you're actually trying to accomplish by the end of the weekend in terms of your model prototype, and then spending a little bit of time planning out kind of the next 2 days. Not in super detail, because obviously 2 days, things happen fast, plans change. But the idea here is just do a little bit of goal setting first thing in the afternoon tomorrow. We'll have a group check-in from 3 to 4, so you can tell us kind of where things are, what your plans are for the weekend, what kind of help you think you'll need, so we can make sure people get to you in a timely fashion starting on Saturday. We'll be around on Friday still too, but we can kind of help prep for the weekend if you can let us know kind of what you think you might need for your project in particular. And then from 4 to 6, we'll have just an open evening work session. So for 2 hours, we'll have the instructors circulating and helping people with the initial phases of getting their projects started. For day 2 on Saturday, from 10 to 10:30, we'll have a quick morning check-in with each group. Again, you can let us know what you might need, anything that came up in the evening on Friday that we haven't talked about yet. Then from 10:30 to 1, you'll just have a large open work block. And we recommend here that you focus on setup and initial model building. Again, just trying to get the skeleton of your prototype working. From 1:30 to 2, we'll have a quick check-in in the main room with the whole group. Let us know how things are going, what you need. And then from 2 to 5:30, you'll have another big afternoon work session block. From 5:30 to 6, we'll have kind of evening reports on the first day. Nothing formal, again, just to tell us where you are and what you need going into the next day. So then day 3, Sunday, from 10 to 10:30, we'll do our morning check-in again. From 10:30 to 2, you'll have time to work on models. So you have a whole extra hour there before we do another quick check-in in the main room. And then from 2:30 to 5, you'll work on models. Then from 5 to 6, we'll have an hour of slightly more formal reports. So we'll give you like a 3 to 4 slide template for you to put together, kind of a just a very brief overview of, again, a reminder of what your project was, how it went, difficulties you faced, and how you overcame them, what still needs to be done, and then a short demonstration of the current state of your prototype so people can kind of see how everybody's project turned out by the end of the weekend. So how the hackathon works is we'll have in this room, the main room will stay open for organizational purposes, and we'll use the main room for check-in meetings. I will be sitting in the main room at all times. Um, so if you need help from a specific instructor, or if you're stuck on something and you're not sure who you need to talk to, you can send somebody back to the main room. And I will try to coordinate with one of the instructors to come help you as soon as possible. Work sessions for groups will occur in breakout rooms. So we'll have a breakout room for each project group. We'll make one for people working individually as well. And the instructors and helpers will circulate. If you're working on a project individually, sometimes we do find it beneficial to just kind of sit in the main room and work. That way, if you have questions, you can either ask me or you can ask the other people who are working on projects by themselves. You'll find that people tend to struggle with some of the same things throughout the weekend, so it is good to have a few people to bounce ideas off of. But we will open a breakout room for each project. That way, if the main room gets noisy or distracting, you can move to your breakout room and work privately as well. And we can send instructors your way as needed. The main room will stay open past the end of day at 6. It usually times out at around midnight. Zoom has a 14-hour limit on total meeting runtime, but we do leave the main room open through the evening and overnight for people who would like to continue using the room to work, depending on your time zone differences in your group. Sometimes it's useful still to have this space. Like I said, I usually check in every hour or so until around midnight or 1 o'clock. So if people are using the room, I'll be here on and off to check in and see if people need anything. We have a question here. What kind of support can you provide if the hackathon project would last for longer than this weekend? If you'd like to continue working on it more seriously, we are happy to continue working with you moving forward. We can continue to schedule meetings if it is something that you're interested in turning maybe into a publication or into a thesis project, or even if it's just something you're interested in working on as a side project. We are always happy to continue meeting with you. And since we'll be involved during the hackathon, we'll kind of already have an idea of what the project is and where it's going as well. So in previous years, we've had a few groups that we've continued working with after the hackathon, and a couple of them have actually gone on to write publications from their hackathon work. So yes, we were happy to stay connected after the hackathon. As far as people go, we will have our usual crew of instructors that will be joining kind of periodically throughout the weekend. I know me, James, Pedro, Gilberto, Jim, and Lorenzo will be around for most. Well, I think Lorenzo's on vacation. He may pop in and out, he said, during the hackathon. But me, James, Gilberto, Pedro, and Jim will be the core group that will be available throughout the hackathon. And I know Joel, Vin, and another member of our group who you have not seen yet this week should be available this weekend to help, as well as Michael Getz. And Professor Rita De Almeida will also be joining to help. We'll kind of have a rotating cast of people throughout the course of the weekend to help with different issues. So again, for teaming, please use the Slack channel in the teaming doc. Take a look. I know we've got a number of projects already in that teaming document. We will actually be looking at that together first thing tomorrow morning to help people start grouping. But if you do have an idea, or if you haven't added your contact information to the teaming doc yet, please do so sometime today so that we can begin helping people find groups tomorrow. All right, any other questions about logistics? We'll talk a little bit about project planning here. We'll go over this again tomorrow in more detail. But I wanted to present it today to get people started thinking about how you might want to break your project down for the weekend. So a few notes about project planning. I know last week on Tuesday, I believe, Tuesday morning, we talked about this idea of how to think about building models and how they consist of different elements. So we had objects, properties, states, behaviors and interactions, initial and boundary conditions, and dynamics and events as kind of our four top level categories of things to think about when you're building your model. And remember, in constructive models like ours, nothing exists until we assert that it exists. We don't really get anything for free. So it is up to us as modelers to choose what is asserted and what we include in our model. For a hackathon project, you'll find that it's often most useful to start as simple as possible, build a prototype and get that running, make sure that the kind of fundamental base of the model works, and then start adding complexity. So it's key to kind of think about what things you need to model, what questions you're trying to answer. That's kind of the big piece. What question do you want to try to answer with your model? And how will you target your 3-day hackathon towards maybe not building a model that fully answers that question, but something that can be turned into a model that does answer that question later. So we'll do this tomorrow, just a little exercise about taking a few minutes to map out your biological problem of interest and ask yourself, what are the specific hypotheses you wish to test with your model? How can they be measured in the real world, and how does your model correlate with those measurements? What are the key components you wish to model and why? So which pieces are necessary to answer the questions you've asked, and which pieces are extraneous for the time being, maybe that you can add realism in later by including them down the road, but for right now, which pieces can be left out of the process and still answer the core question? And then again, what are the key processes, interactions, dynamics, and events you wish to model, and why are these necessary? If you can't come up with a good answer for why they're necessary, then they probably aren't, at least in the context of the 3-day hackathon. So it also talked about the workflow of model development. This is obviously a large process, kind of intended towards building models for publication. Most of your work over the hackathon time will focus on this implementation step. Because you only have 3 days, a lot of it will be spent actually in the code trying to get the model prototype running. But it is important to spend some time, at least on a short version, very short version of walking through, thinking about the modeling process kind of before you jump straight in to the code. If you've spent a little bit of time up front, even just an hour or two, kind of planning out what the model is trying to do and how it correlates to your biological observations, when you do run into problems during the implementation stage, it will be a little bit easier to troubleshoot them because you have an idea already of what the model is trying to accomplish. If you just jump into the code and try to make something that mimics, experimental output, something that mimics an experimental image, and you haven't really thought through all the different pieces of your model, a lot of times you'll end up putting a lot of things together at once, and then you'll run it and it won't work, and you won't have a really good understanding of why it's not working and which pieces aren't working well together. So this will ultimately, doing a little bit of prep work up front will ultimately save you time during the implementation stage because you have a slightly more kind of structured thinking of how the model is supposed to work and which pieces need to come first. We have a conceptual model template, which I will share before we go to lunch here today. I need to grab the link. I believe it's in the hackathon folder. If it's not, I'll move it in there before tomorrow. But this template is large and detailed, but we do like to provide it to people as a way to kind of think about maybe which processes and objects and events and things need to be included in your model. So we will share this with you to get you thinking about that. But again, you don't have to use this template necessarily, but using some kind of structured form that separates the objects, behaviors, interactions, initial and boundary conditions, and events and dynamics will be helpful. And then there's also a discussion of general thoughts on scoping. So scoping your model is obviously the biological problem is big and large and has lots of pieces. And when we talk about scoping the model, we're talking about kind of narrowing down into looking at specific things about that model, as well as thinking about what is realistic and achievable over the course of a 3-day hackathon period. So again, you want to ask yourself what questions your model is trying to answer, what hypotheses are we testing, what is the simulation's function, how does it address these first 2 points, and what do we want or expect the final result to look like? So this is kind of a big thing that's important to think about before you actually start coding, is thinking about what the final result is supposed to look like, so that when you do start getting output, you can determine if the simulation is doing what you expected it to or not. So having some kind of prediction of what your output should be doing will help a lot in determining whether or not your simulation is functioning as expected. I found I have to play a careful coughing game with the little pop-up descriptors on the Zoom toolbar when I try to mute. They get in the way of the cursor. Next set of questions is asking, can the phenomenon we're modeling be broken down into component parts? If it can, how long will each part take to model? Is a single component of our problem enough for a 2-day project? So how long will each component take? And can we just do one of those components as the starting prototype? And which piece is the most foundational? So which components do we need first? Kind of, again, which of these are the base of the model, and then which pieces are kind of that added complexity that I was mentioning in the previous slides. So tackling the parts, and you can kind of do some division of labor here too if you're working in a group, if you have multiple people who are working on the programming aspect. It's important to understand kind of who is doing what, as well as how those pieces will come together at the end of the weekend. So again, having a shared understanding of the model structure is a good way to do that, to make sure everybody is kind of coding toward the same aims. We have had projects in the past where on Sunday people come to put the pieces together, and it's natural that pieces don't fit exactly because people have different coding styles. But the more work you've done up front, thinking about how the pieces will fit together at the end, the easier it is to combine the pieces later. Making sure everybody's speaking relatively the same language. Maybe you're using different dialects, but it's all happening in the same general tier of understanding. Then some thoughts on scoping as far as team logistics are concerned. The hackathon is a very intense, but we found a very productive period as well. So again, you have 2 days to prototype your project. I guess 2.5 days if we're including Friday. But you'll have roughly 10.5 hours of free work time during the days with instructor help. Obviously, you can continue to work longer if you'd like, but you'll have about 10.5 hours of work time with our instructors helping you out. So think about maybe how do you use that instructional time the most usefully. Important questions to address before you start is, what is the end goal for the weekend? Make sure everybody's on the same page about what you're trying to accomplish. What is each person going to do? And you can have multiple jobs in a project group, obviously, but knowing what each person is supposed to be doing at any given time will help avoid a lot of conflict and confusion over the course of the weekend. Again, how will the pieces that people are working on be combined at the end of the weekend? It's also important to identify what you don't know about your project at the start of the weekend. What do you still need to learn, either in terms of the biology, if you need to find experimental parameters, maybe if you need to find a network model that will work with your system, things like that. Also, what do you don't know about CompuCell still that you might need to learn to finish your project? So what do we still need to learn, and when are we going to learn it? Do we need to learn it all up front, or can we get some of the prototype done first and then address gaps in our knowledge as we go, that kind of thing. And then it's also useful if you're working in a group to come up with some kind of protocol that you'll work through when things don't work out. There will be numerous points during the weekend where your model will not be working as intended, or where you'll be struggling to get something implemented properly. And having a protocol for addressing issues like that, even if it's just something as simple as a debugging workflow, will go a long way towards keeping everybody sane and happy working together over the course of the weekend. So setting up some boundaries up front if you're working with a group about what to do when things get a little bit rough over the course of the weekend is also very helpful. So I think that's all I have for now. I see there's some questions in the chat. Let me take a look at those. Okay, people are still talking about compiling. That's good. So Clara says sounds intense. It can be from time to time because again, people are staying up late. You're working very hard for 3 days, but for the most part, we've found that these hackathons are a lot of fun, and it's a very good learning opportunity as well, a chance to really test your what you've learned for the past 2 weeks. So we've had very little conflict with the hackathons in the past. We just like to bring this up because it does happen from time to time, and it is just kind of good to know going in what everybody expects from the project. That way, people don't end up realizing Sunday morning that they had different understandings of what the project was supposed to be doing. So again, we will be here over the course of the next 3 days to help people with all of this. And we're looking forward to working with everybody.